He said it so casually, his laugh blending with theirs. I'd rather kiss a dog than kiss you. For a second, even the string quartet seemed to pause. The laughter came first from his colleagues, polite and hesitant, like they weren't sure if it was truly a joke. Then it grew, louder, meaner, echoing off the glass walls and marble floors of Marcus Whitfield's penthouse, and I smiled. Smiled as if my heart hadn't just cracked open in front of 50 people sipping vintage champagne. The laughter stung more than the words themselves. It wasn't just ridicule, it was validation of his cruelty. They all joined him in it, maybe to protect themselves, maybe because it was easier to laugh than to look uncomfortable. The air was thick with expensive perfume and self-importance. I stood there, my emerald green dress catching the golden light like a jewel placed under glass. The same dress Caleb had chosen for me, claiming it photographed well. He turned back to his friends, basking in their approval. That's when I heard my voice, soft, almost calm, cut through the noise. Then maybe you should teach it loyalty first. It came out before I could stop it. Just a quiet sentence, but it sliced the air cleanly. The laughter stopped. Someone coughed. Caleb's smile froze, the corners trembling slightly as he tried to reshape the moment, tried to laugh it off. But he couldn't. Because everyone had heard the truth in it. Hours earlier, I'd been standing in front of our bedroom mirror, the same emerald fabric pulled tight against my ribs as Caleb rehearsed me. Again. Remember, when someone asks what you do, just say you work at the hospital, he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the reflection. I had already heard it 3 times that week. Don't mention the cardiac unit. Claire, these people don't want to hear about medical stuff at parties. He said it like he was protecting me, but I knew better. He was protecting himself from the shadow of a wife who might shine brighter. 5 years ago, he bragged about marrying a surgeon. Now he treated my career like a secret embarrassment. Got it, I murmured, fastening my earring. He didn't notice the way my voice dulled at the edges. Like light passing through tinted glass, he was already moving to the next topic. The Jenkins will be there tonight. Remember, he's in mergers and acquisitions, not private equity. Don't mix that up again. I almost smiled. The only one who'd ever mixed them up was Caleb himself, last Christmas. But corrections weren't part of the script anymore. Behind him, our reflection was a painting of precision. 2 beautiful people in a beautiful apartment, pretending to be what everyone expected. I adjusted the strap of my dress while he checked his collar again. 17 times, yes, I counted. I always did. It used to make me smile. Once it was endearing, a small nervous habit that showed he cared about making an impression. Now it just looked like obsession dressed in a tailored suit. I tried to fill the silence with something real. I saved a 12-year-old boy today, I said quietly. His mitral valve was failing, but... That's great, honey, Caleb interrupted, his eyes never leaving the mirror. But maybe don't mention that tonight. Nobody wants to hear about blood and surgery over cocktails. Makes people uncomfortable. Stick to light topics. The weather, vacation plans, maybe that new restaurant downtown. The weather. 5 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, 2 years leading one of the best cardiac units in the country, and he wanted me to talk about clouds. My phone buzzed then, a message from the surgical team. The boy was stable, already asking when he could play baseball again. His mother had cried and kissed my hands when I told her he'd be okay. Those moments were the only kind of visibility I cared about. But Caleb measured life by applause, not gratitude. Ready? He asked, though it wasn't a question. He was already walking out the door. The elevator ride to the car felt longer than usual. He reviewed names and trivia like flashcards. Tom Morrison, Pharma deal. Congratulate him, but don't ask details. Jennifer Whitfield, avoid if she's been drinking. I nodded when expected, said in the right places. But my mind wasn't in that elevator. It was in the operating room, hearing the rhythmic beep of monitors that always reminded me what real purpose sounded like. As we stepped out into the night, his hand slid to the small of my back. Not affection, positioning. He did that at every event, as if I were a part of the decor he needed to align just right. Smile more tonight, he whispered, voice firm and polished. You looked miserable at the last party. These are important people, Claire. My career depends on them. His career. Always his. The penthouse elevator opened directly into the living room. High ceilings, chandeliers, a wall of glass overlooking the city like it belonged to them. Marcus greeted Caleb with that loud, performative enthusiasm men like them mistake for friendship. Caleb, you made it. And brought Clare, Marcus said, eyes barely brushing over me before scanning for someone more interesting. I was used to it. Being an accessory that sparkled quietly in the corner. Jennifer Whitfield floated over next, perfume first, then air kisses. Claire, darling, that dress is divine. Caleb has such exquisite taste, of course. Even my body was his achievement now. Thank you, I said simply, because anything more would have invited another compliment I didn't want. Claire works at the hospital, Caleb added, when Marcus asked what I'd been up to lately. Just works. Not leads, not saves lives. Just works. I nodded politely, letting the champagne in my hand become my shield. The bubbles burned slightly as they went down. False joy in liquid form. Later, the music softened. Someone dimmed the lights, and couples began drifting toward the center of the room. Marcus held Jennifer by the waist. She laughed, her head tilted back in easy happiness. The melody was familiar, slow, old-fashioned. It reminded me of that night at the Drake Hotel, our wedding reception, long after guests had gone home. Caleb had pulled me onto the empty dance floor, both of us barefoot, champagne drunk, whispering about a life that still felt new. We'll have everything, he'd promised against my ear. Kids, a house with a garden. Sunday mornings with coffee in the paper. You and me, Claire, always. That memory was a ghost now. But when I heard the first notes of that song tonight, something in me reached for it anyway. I crossed the room, past laughter and perfume, and the low hum of money being casually discussed. Caleb was talking with Bradley and some client I didn't know, gesturing animatedly. I waited until there was a pause, then placed my hand lightly on his arm. Dance with me, I whispered. He looked down at my hand like it was an inconvenience. Claire, I'm in the middle of something. Just one song. Bradley smiled awkwardly, sensing the tension. Go on, man. She's your wife. Caleb exhaled sharply, his smile tight. Maybe later, he said, voice low but firm. I should have stepped away then. But the music kept playing, and I wanted, just for a moment, to feel something human between us again. So I reached for him again, softer this time. He jerked his arm back. I said no, he snapped. Then, with a half-laugh meant to lighten his own cruelty, added, Honestly, I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you. The sound of laughter spread like fire through the room. Someone muttered, Oh my God, and another chuckled nervously. Caleb grinned at his friends, trying to turn humiliation into comedy. And I stood there, the woman in emerald, holding her breath, her skin burning where his words had landed. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. It was quiet, but it carried. Then maybe you should teach it loyalty first. The air stopped moving. Even the music hesitated, as if it knew something sacred had been broken. Bradley coughed. Someone set down a glass too loudly. Caleb's jaw tightened, his laugh collapsing into silence. For a flicker of a second, his face showed something unguarded. Panic, maybe. But then the mask returned. Always the dramatic one, he said lightly, pretending to find humor again. She's joking, of course, no one replied. I turned away. Not abruptly, not in anger. Just done. I walked toward the terrace doors, the city's lights stretching below like a sea of tiny witnesses. My champagne glass was still full, but I set it on the nearest table. My hand trembled only once, then steadied. Through the reflection in the glass, I saw Caleb watching me. He looked almost afraid. I turned slightly, catching my own reflection instead. A woman standing very still, her green dress glowing like a blade under soft light. She didn't look humiliated anymore. She looked awake. For the first time in years, I realized how quiet power can be. It doesn't need to shout or break things. Sometimes it just needs to stop pretending. The city shimmered beyond the glass, indifferent, endless, alive. And in that silence, I thought, he took my name, my silence, and my softness. Tonight I'll take them back. The elevator doors closed with a soft sigh, sealing Clare in a quiet capsule of glass and gold. Her reflection trembled on the mirrored walls, eyes rimmed in mascara, lips curved in a practiced half-smile. The same smile she had worn all evening, even when the laughter burned through her like acid. It was almost midnight. The city below shimmered, cars streaming through rain-wet streets, the skyline fractured by light. From up here, the world looked distant, clean, contained, exactly how Caleb liked things. She touched the emerald silk of her dress. It still held the faint scent of his cologne, that sharp cedar he insisted she buy for him every birthday. She used to love that scent. Now it smelled like restraint. Her fingers brushed against the neckline, where the fabric had dug into her skin when she'd stood too straight, too still, trying to be the perfect frame for his success. "Emerald," he'd said, "to bring out your eyes." What he meant was, behave like the gem I paid for. The elevator stopped on the penthouse floor. Their home was spotless, dimly lit by golden sconces Caleb had imported from Florence. Claire's heels clicked softly on the marble, echoing in the silence. The place felt too large, too precise, too empty, like a museum built to honor someone else's life. She placed her purse on the glass console. Her phone buzzed, a string of messages lighting up the screen. Caleb. You embarrassed me. Caleb. That wasn't funny. Caleb. We'll talk in the morning. No. Are you home? No apology. She stared at his name for a long moment, then turned the phone face down. The quiet of the apartment stretched around her, heavy as the night. In the bathroom, she stood before the mirror. The same mirror she had faced hours earlier, when he'd walked in as she was pinning her hair. "You're taking too long," he'd said, slipping into his tuxedo jacket with that casual arrogance that made her skin crawl. "You know how important this dinner is. Don't overdo the makeup. You'll look desperate." She had smiled back then, too. Always smiling. He'd walked up behind her, adjusted her necklace, and whispered, "Try to be softer tonight. Less opinionated." That word. Softer. He wielded it like a weapon. She remembered how his hand had lingered on her shoulder, possessive, polished, claiming. She had said nothing, not even when he added, "Smile. Claire, you're lucky to be here." Now, she looked at her reflection again and whispered into the stillness, "You're lucky to be here." But the words tasted different, bitter, like something breaking free. She began to unpin her hair. Each metallic click echoed like a small rebellion. The night replayed itself in fragments. The ballroom chandelier had glimmered like frost, the air thick with perfume and money. Clare had stood beside Caleb while he talked business, his voice booming, his laughter choreographed. People liked him. They liked his stories, his effortless cruelty disguised as humor. She'd laugh too, quietly, when he made a joke about her artsy hobbies. She'd trained herself to laugh at herself, before others could, but the laughter tonight, when he said he'd rather kiss a dog, had been different, raw, public. And when she answered, "Then, maybe you should teach it loyalty first." She hadn't planned it. It came from somewhere deep and long buried. That single sentence had cracked something open. Not in him, in her. In the dressing room, she slipped off the emerald gown. The zipper's hiss felt like a sigh of relief. She stood in her slip, bare feet on the cold marble, feeling more alive than she had in months. Caleb would come home soon. He'd storm in, angry but rehearsed. He'd tell her she embarrassed him in front of investors. He'd lower his voice, step closer, and she'd shrink the way she always did. Except, she wouldn't. Not tonight. She walked to the bedroom, opened the top drawer of the dresser. Inside was a small velvet box, her wedding earrings, pearls he'd chosen for her because, Diamonds are for women who think they've earned something. She snapped the box shut, then her eyes fell on the envelope tucked behind it. Ivory paper, gold-embossed lettering, the Franklin Gallery. Her solo exhibition invitation. Caleb had never mentioned it. She'd found it crumpled in the trash last month. Her fingers tightened around it. He had thrown away the one thing that was hers. Her art. Her work. Her proof that she existed beyond his shadow. She smoothed the paper out on the dresser. The date was in 2 weeks. She was listed as Clare R. Everly. Not Mrs. Caleb Everly. Just Clare. The sound of the front door unlocking snapped her back. He was home. She didn't move. She listened to the shuffle of his shoes, the rustle of his jacket being hung with precision. Then his voice, flat and irritated. "Where are you?" She walked into the living room, arms crossed. Here. Caleb stood near the bar, loosening his tie. His reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered, though his confidence hadn't aged a day. "You shouldn't have said that," he said. "Do you have any idea what people will think?" Claire leaned against the doorway. "Maybe they'll think you should teach your dog loyalty first." His jaw twitched. "You think you're funny?" "I think I'm finally awake," he scoffed, pouring himself a drink. The ice clinked like teeth. "You're being dramatic." It was a joke. It was cruel. He turned, the smirk fading. "Everything offends you now. You used to understand how the world works." She met his gaze. "No, Caleb, I used to understand you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension between them wasn't loud. It was cold, clinical, precise. Then he set down his glass. "You'll apologize tomorrow. I've already drafted something for your socials." Her lips parted, then closed again. He was serious. She walked toward the window. The skyline shimmered behind her reflection, fractured and doubled. "No, Caleb, I won't apologize." He let out a low laugh. "You will, because without me, you're nothing. Remember that." Claire turned slowly, her voice quiet. "You keep saying that. I'm starting to wonder if you say it because you're afraid it isn't true." He stared at her, eyes narrowing, calculating. Then with forced calm, he said, "Go to bed, Claire." She didn't move, and something about her stillness unsettled him. He left without another word. When the bedroom door clicked shut, she exhaled. The air tasted of dust and champagne. She walked to the window again, palms pressed to the cool glass. Below, the city glowed. 1,000 windows, 1,000 lives. Her reflection looked back at her, half shadow, half light. "He took my name," she murmured. "My silence, my softness." Then her voice steadied. "Tonight, I'll take them back." The clock struck 1. She sat at her desk, once meant for her art, now buried under financial papers, event schedules, Caleb's correspondence. She pushed them aside and took out a fresh sheet of paper. Her pen hovered. She began to write, not to him, but to herself. Remember who you were before the laughter stopped feeling real. Remember the woman who painted until sunrise and didn't care if anyone approved. Remember that silence is not peace. Her handwriting trembled, then steadied. This wasn't a plan yet. It was a pulse. A beginning. She reached for her phone, opened her hidden folder of photos, portraits she had painted years ago. Women with fierce eyes and half smiles, each one a reflection of something she'd lost. Her favorite was titled The Quiet Rebellion, a woman in emerald green, staring straight ahead, unflinching. Claire touched the screen. "You were always trying to tell me something, weren't you?" She didn't realize she was crying until the first tear hit the phone. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly. She rose, walked to the wardrobe, and slid open a hidden compartment behind the drawers. Inside lay her old sketchbooks, dusty but intact. She flipped one open, pencil marks fading but alive. The sketches were of faces. Some hers, some imagined. Each one had the same expression, contained, polite, hollow-eyed, and on the last page, a sketch she barely remembered drawing, Caleb's face. Perfect, handsome, expressionless. She picked up a charcoal stick and drew a crack through it. Then another. and another. By the time she stopped, his features were unrecognizable. She felt lighter. In the bedroom, she slipped under the covers, though sleep didn't come. Caleb's steady breathing filled the silence. Even in dreams, he sounded entitled. She turned away from him, eyes open to the faint city light leaking through the curtains. Her mind replayed that moment at the party, the laughter, her reply, the way the room had frozen. It had felt like falling off a cliff, but maybe falling wasn't the same as breaking. Maybe it was just the beginning of flight. By morning, the sky was a dull silver. She rose quietly, dressed in a simple linen blouse and jeans. No makeup, no jewelry. For the first time in years, she felt like herself. Caleb was still asleep, one arm draped over her side of the bed. The same arm that had once drawn her close, now heavy and foreign. She slipped out from under it, stood by the door for a moment and whispered, "You'll wake up, and everything will still look the same." But it won't be. Then she left. The elevator ride down felt different this time. She caught her reflection again. But there was something new in her eyes. Not fire yet, but ember. In her bag was the crumpled invitation to the Franklin Gallery. She ran her thumb over the gold lettering. For once, she didn't care if he found out. As she stepped into the morning light, the city's hum rose around her, 1,000 lives moving forward. And she thought, let him keep his laughter. I'll keep the truth. The city had begun to shift around her, not with noise or spectacle, but with the kind of quiet changes only those who've learned to watch notice. A week had passed since the night of the emerald dress. A week since Caleb's laughter cracked something inside her that would never mend the same way again. In those 7 days, Clare had learned that silence, when used correctly, could be the sharpest blade. It began with the accounts. Her name had always been there, small but legal, at the bottom of the documents Caleb never truly read. He had trusted her precision, the very quality he had mocked her for. Under her signature, she moved what was rightfully hers. Not vengeance, just correction. The art sales, the gallery royalties, the consultancy stipends he had casually absorbed into his business portfolio, she traced them all. Every dollar of her past devotion turned into quiet fuel for her, independence. The transfers were clean, invisible, elegant, and, when she sent the final one, to the St. Althea Pediatric Unit, she did not sign it. No press release, no announcement, just an anonymous deposit large enough to rebuild an entire wing. Caleb would never know. But the children would, and that was enough. The night of the fundraiser arrived with its usual pageantry, velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers, and the faint perfume of self-importance. Caleb thrived in this environment. The applause, the flashbulbs, the illusion that generosity could be measured in receipts. He had recovered quickly after their confrontation. Or so he thought. His confidence had a way of regenerating overnight, fed by denial and expensive scotch. "Ready, darling?" he called from the hallway, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. Clare stepped out of the bedroom. He paused. She wasn't in emerald this time. She wore white, simple, structured, with a neckline that spoke of purity, not performance. No jewels, no ornamentation, just a small silver pendant, a relic from her mother, glinting at her throat. White? Caleb frowned. "You'll look washed out under the lights." Clare smiled faintly. "I'll risk it." He shrugged, already turning back to his reflection. "Suit yourself." The car ride was silent. Outside, the city glimmered like broken glass. Clare watched the light smear across the tinted window and thought, how fragile everything looks when it thinks it's solid. The ballroom pulsed with the rhythm of polite laughter and calculated generosity. Waiters glided like shadows. Music hummed beneath conversation. Clare stood beside Caleb as she always had, perfectly positioned, visible but voiceless. She smiled when introduced. She listened while he spoke. She even laughed once, softly, when Marcus, their mutual friend and financier, approached with his usual blend of charm and cruelty. "Clare," Marcus grinned, swirling his champagne. "Still recovering from Caleb's famous sense of humor?" The group chuckled. Caleb smirked, emboldened by the attention. My wife can't take a joke, he said smoothly, the same line dressed in new silk. The laughter rose. But this time, Claire didn't smile. She turned slightly toward him, her voice calm, measured, and just loud enough to carry. No, Caleb, she said. I just stopped mistaking disrespect for humor. The air shifted. The laughter stumbled mid-breath. Even the string quartet seemed to hesitate. Marcus blinked, uncertain whether to laugh again. Well, that's fair, he said, his tone faltering. Caleb's hand tightened around his glass, the smile stretching too wide, too late. But Claire wasn't done. Marcus tried to recover the mood. So, Caleb, how's the hospital project coming along? The papers said the new wing was your idea. Claire felt the weight of the moment hover like a held breath. She could have stayed silent. But silence was what built this empire of glass in the first place. Her voice was steady. Oh, that project? She said. The donations Caleb mentioned weren't his. They came from the hospital fund I direct. He just took the photo. The words were soft, almost kind. But in their gentleness was something irrevocable. Marcus's expression flickered from amusement to confusion. Jennifer, the PR executive beside him, lowered her glass. Around them, conversation began to fade like the dimming of stage lights. Caleb's smile froze. Claire, he said under his breath, his voice too tight, too slow. Not here. She looked at him, calm, almost tender. Why not? It's a fundraiser. Truth deserves a little audience. A small silence widened around them. Marcus cleared his throat. Wait, so you mean, yes, Claire said simply. Every donation he mentioned was drawn from accounts under my management. Every event photo, every plaque, funded by me. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was factual. The stillness of her words made them sharper. Caleb's hand trembled slightly. The glass in his grip tilted, champagne spilling over his cufflink. Jennifer looked from him to Claire, then back again. Is that true? He didn't answer. The questions began like whispers, soft, uncertain, but within seconds they multiplied. About transparency, about credibility, about reputation, and in the middle of it all, Claire stood unflinching, her white dress catching the light like quiet truth made visible. The empire of reputation, built on charm and pretense, began to fracture in real time. They left early. The drive home was suffocating. Caleb didn't speak until the elevator doors closed behind them. Then, his control shattered. You humiliated me, he hissed, spinning toward her. The echo in the marble hallway made the words sound larger, uglier. Claire placed her clutch on the console. No, she said softly. You did that years ago. I just stopped protecting you. He laughed, disbelieving. You think anyone will side with you? You'll look bitter, unstable. I don't need sides, Caleb. Her calmness unsettled him more than fury could have. He moved closer, his face inches from hers. You'll regret this. I already did, she whispered. Every day I stayed, he recoiled as if struck. For a long, silent moment, they just stared at each other, the perfect couple finally stripped of their choreography. Then Claire reached into her clutch and withdrew a plain white envelope. She placed it on the marble table between them. This, she said, is everything you built on my silence. He frowned, tearing it open. Inside were copies of bank statements, property titles, and transfer confirmations, all clean, all legal. His name was absent. Hers wasn't. You can keep the empire, she said quietly, but now you'll have to explain how it was built. The papers trembled in his hand. This is theft. No, Caleb, this is balance. She turned to leave. Don't walk away from me, he shouted. She didn't look back. I'm not walking away. I'm walking back. To myself. And then she was gone. The echo of her heels followed her down the hall, fading into the hush of the elevator doors. Outside, it was raining. The city lights blurred through the downpour, streaks of gold and silver melting into each other. Claire stepped into it without hesitation. The white fabric of her dress clung to her skin, the cold water stinging like baptism. She lifted her face toward the sky and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, She felt the weight leaving her body, the invisible weight of pretending, pleasing, enduring. Each drop felt like truth washing over the lie of who she'd been told to be. She walked slowly down the pavement, past the waiting taxis and glittering doorways. Somewhere behind her, high above, the empire of glass she had once lived in stood trembling. It wouldn't collapse tonight. Empires never do all at once. They fracture quietly from within, until one morning the light hits just right, and every crack becomes visible. And she thought, let him handle the breaking. I've already begun the rebuilding. A week later, she visited St. Althea's. No cameras, no speeches. Just quiet hallways and the smell of antiseptic and crayons. The new pediatric wing had already begun construction. Her donation, anonymous, untraceable, had accelerated the project. As she walked through the temporary ward, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. Are you the lady who sent the books? Claire smiled. Something like that. The child grinned, holding up a watercolor she'd painted. A house, a sky, a woman in a white dress. Claire's throat tightened. Keep painting, she whispered. It helps you remember who you are. That evening, Claire returned to her apartment. Her own apartment now. Smaller, simpler, real. She unpacked her easel from storage, unfolded the legs and set it near the window. The skyline outside glowed, distant, softened by rain. She placed a blank canvas on the stand and picked up a brush. The first stroke was shaky, the second surer. By the third, her hands had stopped trembling. She painted until dawn. Not perfection, just release. Colors colliding, blending, breathing. When the morning light poured in, she stepped back. On the canvas was a woman standing in the rain. White dress, silver pendant, eyes open and unafraid. She titled it, The Empire of Glass. He had built his life on appearances. Glass walls, glass smiles, glass promises. But glass, no matter how beautiful, was never meant to hold the weight of truth, and Clare, quiet, unbreakable Clare, had simply stopped pretending it could. It was strange how silence could become a kind of company. Weeks had passed, maybe months. Time no longer arrived in waves of obligation, just steady, ordinary days that Clare could finally feel belonged to her. The apartment she now lived in was smaller, tucked in the corner of the city near the hospital. The building was older, the kind with narrow hallways and windows that didn't quite close properly, but the light that streamed in each morning had a softness the mansion never knew. Her mornings began not with rehearsed smiles or social briefings, but with the sound of boiling water and the distant chatter of the garden below. Nurses on break, patients strolling slowly, volunteers laughing near the rose beds. The quiet suited her. There were still days when her mind reached for Caleb's presence out of habit. A sound at the door. A coat dropped on a chair, but those echoes no longer hurt. They were simply fading. She'd returned fully to her work at the hospital, her office window overlooking the children's wing she'd helped build. Her name was small on the plaque beside the door, but the knowledge that it existed, that it meant something real, was enough. One evening, as she signed discharge forms under the dim light of her desk lamp, she noticed her reflection in the window. Calm, focused, a faint smile tracing her lips. She realized she hadn't seen that face in years. The world outside hadn't been as quiet. Caleb's downfall didn't arrive in headlines or handcuffs. It came quietly, in the same slow erosion that had once eaten at her marriage. First, a story leaked about financial irregularities tied to his firm's charity events. Then, a partner withdrew support to protect the company's image. Then another. By the time the whispers reached the social pages, his once golden reputation was a ghost of itself, an empire of glass, finally shattering under the weight of its own reflection. Clare read about it only once. A short article in a digital business magazine. Donor funds under review. Prominent social investor faces audit. She closed the tab, exhaled softly, and returned to her patient notes. No satisfaction. No vengeance. Only peace, because she'd already left that world. A moment of grace arrived quietly, too. It was a Friday afternoon when she stopped by the hospital cafeteria for coffee. The line was long, the air heavy with the scent of pastries and disinfectant. From behind, a woman called out, "Dr. Hamilton?" Claire turned, and there she was, the mother of a boy from months ago. The one with the heart condition. The woman's eyes welled instantly as she rushed forward and hugged Claire tightly, words tumbling out between tears. "You saved my boy," she whispered, voice shaking. "You'll never know what that means. He's home now." He laughs again. Thank you. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire didn't deflect. She didn't downplay or retreat behind professionalism. She simply smiled, genuinely, wholly, and said, "You don't owe me thanks. Just tell him to keep smiling. That's enough." The woman squeezed her hand before leaving behind the faint smell of lavender and gratitude. Claire sat by the window, coffee untouched, her heart strangely light. She realized she could breathe again. That night, the city pulsed with soft neon below her apartment window. Streetlights flickered over wet pavement, painting reflections that shimmered like veins of silver. Claire sat at her desk with a cup of tea, papers scattered around her. Budget proposals, medical drafts, and a letter she hadn't opened yet from the hospital board. Beside it lay the emerald dress. Folded neatly, it looked smaller than she remembered. It had been the dress she wore when everything began, the night of laughter that wasn't laughter, of humiliation masked as charm. Now it was only fabric. A relic of a version of herself who'd smiled for the wrong reasons. She reached for the small heart drawing, the one she'd once kept pinned on her office board. The child's crayon heart with a messy bandage drawn across it. She pinned it to the emerald fabric gently, her fingers steady. "Not broken," she whispered, voice almost a breath. "Just rebuilt." Days turned into a rhythm again. Mornings at the hospital, evenings by the window. Sometimes she'd walk to the nearby bookshop or sit in the garden and read. Life had slowed, not from loss, but from intention. And though she never sought out news of Caleb, stories had a way of finding her through whispers. "Did you hear about that investor, Caleb Hart?" one nurse murmured in the break room. "Apparently his accounts are frozen. The audit found everything under his wife's name. Poor woman, whoever she was." Claire smiled faintly, stirred her tea and said nothing, because she wasn't poor anymore. Not in dignity, not in peace. A few nights later, she finally opened the letter. The board had approved the pediatric expansion project, fully funded. Construction beginning next spring. At the bottom was a new name, the Dr. M. Fisher Pediatric Wing, her late mentor, the one who taught her that medicine wasn't about status but presence. She pressed the letter to her chest, eyes glistening, not from grief this time, but from a tender kind of pride. Outside rain began to fall again, just like that night, the night she'd walked away. But this time, she didn't stand in it for cleansing. She watched it quietly, from warmth. When she left the hospital that evening, the world felt lighter. The rain had stopped, the pavement shining under the glow of street lamps. As she locked the glass door behind her, she noticed a dog and its owner passing by. A golden retriever, tail wagging furiously. The dog stopped, looked up at her, and barked happily as if greeting an old friend. Claire chuckled softly. "You chose the wrong loyalty." "Caleb," she thought, but didn't say aloud. She didn't need to anymore, because silence had become her language of strength. She walked down the street, the city humming softly around her, buses sighing, people laughing, life moving. Her reflection appeared briefly in a shop window. White coat, calm face, steady stride, a woman reborn not by rage, but by release. At home, she wrote one last note in her journal before bed. Forgiveness isn't about absolving the other. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they convinced you to doubt. She closed the book, set it aside, and turned off the lamp. The city beyond her window shimmered in the dark, like an empire rebuilt from quiet truths. Empires fall quietly when built on arrogance, but kindness that builds forever. If this story touched you, subscribe, or share where you're watching from. These stories matter,